In November 2008, Sage Publications celebrated the 20th anniversary of its Counselling in Action series of books. At a reception held in London, Sage Managing Director Stephen Barr paid tribute to those who had contributed to its success.
You know, in publishing, we know what happens with our books. That basically they start and they sell quite well for a while and then they stop. And with Counselling in Action, it started and it just went on getting better and better and better year after year. So we've actually sold over the years, over these 20 years, we've sold almost 500,000 copies of Counselling in Action books. And so what I wanted to do was just sort of pay tribute to some of the things that I think made that success and contributed to why the Counselling in Action series was something, was such a phenomenal success, has been such a phenomenal success, continues to be such a phenomenal success. So in terms of the big drivers of that, other than the fact that obviously I think there was a timing thing. There was a timing thing that the series was launched at the right moment as counselling was growing in the UK market. But there was a lot more than that made the Counselling in Action series so successful. And so I mean the first thing was the authors. I think the authors in the series not only were sort of creme de la creme, fantastic figures in British counselling, but they also did something in these books which was something that's actually very difficult to do. And I think it's very difficult to write accessible, clear introductions to content which doesn't oversimplify, that doesn't lose the meaning and nuance of the sort of more that really simplifies effectively and conveys difficult content clearly. And I think that the authors in this series consistently managed to take difficult issues and make them accessible. And I think that's an astonishing skill. And so many people write inaccessibly, and that actually the authors in the series consistently achieved something that made it possible for those books to be used so widely and valued so highly by so many people.
The Counselling Channel spoke to some of the authors and editors who have worked on the series over the years, and series editor Wendy Dryden began by telling us how the project came about in the first place.
Well, in 1986, I think it was, I was at a conference at Christmas time, the BPS London conference, and I was doing what I used to do in those days, which is cruising around the publisher's desk trying to pick up free copies, and came across a bottle of wine that was associated with Sage, and cheekily asked the person who was manning the desk whether I could have a glass of wine, and she said no. I said, why? She said, because you look like a sociologist. I said, I'm not. And she found out who I was. I'd just published, edited a book called Individual Therapy in Britain at that time, and so she knew who I was, and she gave me a glass of wine and suggested that we meet up later because she had some ideas to discuss for a series. So she wined me and dined me, and in a drunken haze, I guess, signed me up to edit the Counselling in Action series, which at that point was going to be about 4 or 5 books outlining the major approaches to counselling at that time, and how it, with particular emphasis on the counselling process, how it unfolded from the beginning to the middle to the end. And that's how it started, really. It was the first, I think, substantial series of books in counselling in Britain. So I think it gave counselling I feel like a base, if you like, a solidity, which I mean, I think it's less relevant now because there were really loads of books in counselling written by British authors. But I think it really provided a forum for people in Britain to write and to show that counselling was a force to be taken seriously, really.
I was in, as it were, the coalface, because I am the co-author of one of the books which was in the very first phase of the Counselling in Action series. In 1988, I think 4 books were published, and Person-Centred Counselling in Action, of which I'm the co-author with my dear friend and colleague Dave Mearns, was amongst those 4. Counselling in Action has given, I think, to the counselling profession a whole series of authoritative books on many different counselling orientations. But more than that, it has actually given books which are totally accessible. Accessible not only to those who are training in the different counselling orientations, but interestingly too, I think, accessible to potential clients. So that this particular series has really at one and the same time provided essential, if you like, training material for courses of all kinds up and down the country, but it's also provided almost an encyclopedic kind of review of these different orientations, which is available to potential clientele. If I can just give you an example of this, in my own case, I have actually had clients who come into their first counselling session actually brandishing a copy of Person-Centred Counselling in Action. And I've even had clients say to me things like, "That's not what you said on page 167 of Person-Centred Counselling in Action. Are you really being true to your person-centred philosophy?" So that these books, I think, have been an enormous asset to the profession in so many different ways. But for me, it's their accessibility as well as the great range of orientations that they cover.
Well, I was asked by Windy Dryden way back 22 years ago, I guess, to contribute to the series, a book called Feminist Counselling in Action. Now, 20 years ago, feminism was quite a live, exciting and important issue. And the idea was to bring counselling and I guess politics in general, but particularly the feminist and female-orientated side of things. And so because I'd already written a few articles and chapters and things on the subject, they approached me and asked me if I would do it. I think it's brought counselling concepts that can be quite complex to a much wider audience. And I think it's played a big role in making counselling the mainstream, popular way of thinking, as well as actually ways of getting better when you're feeling not well or you're feeling down. It's more than that. It's actually bringing a whole set of concepts, thinking about human beings in a different way to a very large number of people.
The Counselling in Action series has been a hugely important sort of contribution to counselling and psychotherapy, not just training but development of qualified practitioners, and continues to be. If I go back to my training, sort of back starting in the 1980s, whilst there was stuff that was published, there was nothing as accessible and as coherent as this series. I can think probably in my time as a practitioner I've accessed most of the books in the series and continue to. So I think as a trainee it makes sort of theory and practice really accessible. It sort of just presents it. But also, and I think this is a bit that's overlooked quite a bit, as a qualified practitioner in terms of my continuing professional development, it's such a massive contribution for that in helping me think about what I do and how I practice with clients.